I'm so excited to be with you today. Anthony, you're a globally respected breathwork teacher. You've guided hundreds of thousands toward inner resilience and authentic awakening. You're a founder and now an author of the new book, Outer Chaos, Inner Calm, 12 Chapters to Change Your World from Inside Out. So your journey, I guess, could be described as moving from outward success through illness, ego disillusion, spiritual rebirth. Well, I want to turn it over to you. It's your story, right? Where are you now on this journey? And maybe you could help us understand the picture.
Well, if you've read the book, I think I'm at that stage of mastery to mystery. I'm not fooled by the concept that the next peak is the ultimate peak. And I'm understanding that I'm in a range of peaks and valleys. And so I think there's a bit of a disillusion of what success means, what accomplishment means, the value of purpose, and so many of those things. I don't want to put anybody off reaching that peak because it's really worthy. If you don't make it for the peak, you don't develop the muscle. So we need to do that as a practice. But I think I'm at a stage in my life where I'm understanding that there is a finiteness to this. If life were a bookshelf, I can see the last few books, how much space there is for the last few books of my life, and I intend to write every single one of them. So that's the stage I'm at.
That's beautiful. I love that mastery to mystery. That's it's just, if that intrigues you like it intrigued me, then this book is for you. So, the book, which I'll say the title again, Outer Chaos, Inner Calm. Who did you write it for, and how will it benefit your intended audience?
Well, of course, they say no matter what you write, it's biographical, it's autobiographical, because the person that's doing the writing is you, right? So it definitely bears a lot of reflection on my own life. And I've been writing a book about breathwork for about 8 years, and this isn't the one. This is a different book. It came out because I was inspired. I started working with many founders and the disillusionment that they were facing. Like, gosh, I've done it all. I've had it all. And what's next? This isn't it. This isn't what I set it up to be. And so I was moved to put pen to paper again. And this is really about not just a founder, but accepting that we're a founder of every moment we experience. We are a creator of every moment, or a co-creator of every moment that we experience. So how can we bring that awareness into our daily life, which is so crowded with so much chaos?
What comes to mind is I remember reading Alan Watts has this quote, and he said, "The meaning of life is to be fully engaged with whatever it is that is in front of you, whatever is in the moment before you." And I remember thinking, somewhat in a disappointed fashion, about probably 10 years ago, oh, wow, that doesn't sound very good. But now, I guess I'm at a place where that really resonates, especially with what you say right there, is that, the past and the future, they don't really exist. They will exist when it's now, right? And now is really the only thing that we have. So there's something really unique about the way you brought that into this space. So thank you. There's something new that's helped me become aware there. So I thought it was interesting that the book focuses on Joseph Campbell. It uses this Joseph Campbell's hero journey sort of framework.
Yeah.
To understand, our life's journey. Now, could you introduce this idea for maybe listeners who aren't familiar, and kind of how does it relate to your work?
Well, are you speaking for those who aren't familiar with what the hero's journey is?
Yeah.
Okay.
With both. Yeah.
So I think what the hero's journey tells us is that there's a beginning and a middle and an end to everything. And it doesn't really matter how long that experience is. It could be one that lasts a minute or 2 minutes, or it could be a lifetime. Or some people would say even lifetimes. In that beginning, in the middle, and the end, there are parts of us as humans, as we're involved in that beginning, middle, and end, that we go through certain very predictable stages. So, for example, when you're called into doing something different, which might be half pull, half push, right? Maybe you're fed up with where you are at the moment and you want something else, or maybe you sense something that's so compelling and attractive that you gather the energy to move toward it. That's really where the journey begins, where we leave what we know, and we generally have enough impetus and enthusiasm to leave the comfort zone and to step out of it in exploration. And usually in some wonderful way, the universe responds when we do make that step, when we demonstrate our own boldness, that somehow something else fits and confirms it was the right thing to do. That's not to say there isn't resistance, because we have to negotiate with resistance in order to be able to move forward, even if we're walking down a street. Or like I was just pacing it in New York City just now on the way back from the vet. And, of course, there's resistance. You're having to weave and turn in order to move forwards. So it's not to discount resistance or to knock it, because it has a particular value. But that first part of our journey is that spurt, if you will, and the glorious, glorious celebration of, I can do this. I'm going to do this. I'm committed and I'm going to do this. Then, of course, and this happens in relationships as well, the next stage is like, okay, I'm not sure. I didn't quite know it was going to be this challenging. Okay, this is calling me into a new level of being. I'm really going to have to step up to deal with this. And that ascent of the peak that we spoke of earlier is like full of trepidation and trials, and you could say demons or monsters, and they are usually parts of ourselves that we need to negotiate with in order to prevail. And sometimes it means slaying the monster, and sometimes it means getting a saddle on it and riding it and using the energy that's there in order to continue our climb, our ascent to mastery. And this usually results in a do or die moment, which is like, oh my God, I don't have enough energy to meet this situation. What am I going to do? And all the fears come up. And in order to prevail, we need to continue. And I think this is one of the biggest lessons of the hero's journey, when we feel overwhelmed, that there is actually something that's waiting to happen. And I think that's a really important message. If we forget something is about to happen, we will stay in that, we'll become a victim of that sense of overwhelm. If we know something else is going to happen, we're going to remain watchful and awake and aware. So we then go into the last half of the journey, which is really finding the treasure, which is perhaps that peak of the mountain, and then understanding that, okay, now I need to bring this treasure home. In order for it to have value, there's no point looking at a bunch of jewels in a treasure chest on a desert island and thinking how rich you are. You need to take it back to Beverly Hills or to New York in order to spend it, in order to realize what it means. And in the hero's journey, this would equate to whatever the message is that you've understood, whatever the gain is that you've achieved in yourself. It's about how do you actually bring that back to the world, and what does that journey look like? And so that mastery isn't just an egoic gloating. There is a glow moment, a glow-mo, but we actually need to bring this back, usually to where we came from, is the best measurement of all of a successfully completed hero's journey. And that means negotiating again with some of the challenges, some of the shadow stuff, some of the monsters, things like atonement, forgiveness, those things like we understand that we did when we were younger that maybe they weren't so cool after all. Maybe I wasn't kind to people. Maybe I wounded people because I was wounded. And we get to come to terms with all of that. So then the message we do bring, I don't know, just imagine a grandfather with his grandchild and the sweetness that exists between them, the humility that the grandfather has to be able to sit on the floor and play again. And so that's what I would call that's how I would describe the hero's journey in this moment. Like I said, that could last an hour, like a breathwork session, or a day, or a relationship, or a lifetime.
I think there's a couple of things that struck me in your explanation there. I've studied this. I've used this in different coaching frameworks for my business and whatnot. But you mentioned something there that I thought was interesting. And I think I saw this in the book too. And for context, I'll share a story. I had a young person who worked for me who came into the office and was like, I'm sorry, I'm running a few minutes late. I've just been overstimulated all day. And for whatever reason in that moment, it just occurred to me that I didn't have that language when I was younger. And so I sort of had this belief when I was younger that life was just overwhelming and you just were sort of always in overwhelm. And I think because of that, because I still sort of battle with that, when you talk about when you're overwhelmed, it means something else is going to happen. I get stuck there in that. Like, I think I know at an intellectual level, but what is it that What might be a reason why I'm having trouble grasping that?
Because, well, usually it's because we're frightened of what we don't know. We don't know. And we also generally have learnt to consider it normal that we live on a continuum, a fear continuum, I call it, a fear spectrum, which is that if we really strive and succeed, there's no fear for a moment, but then it comes back again. And
Yeah.
we've got to strive and succeed again in order to feel some sense of peace. And it's like we're kind of on the wrong railway track. There's another
Yeah.
track, and there's another, I call it a matrix, actually. There's another whole matrix that exists that we don't notice because all our bandwidth is confused just keeping our head above water. And
Yeah.
even mastery can be just keeping your head above water. I work with a lot of successful people who are quite broken inside and who don't know how can I make this good? I'm like beating myself to continue. I'm exhausted. I'm stressed all the time. My adrenaline levels are like at 70% all the time.
Yeah.
What does more look like? How do I get more out of life? How can I enjoy? And so that's really where we get to do the work and understand that there's a lot that's going on. If we can clear our bandwidth a little bit from the things that occupy us and preoccupy us, that there is something else to be noticed. And that's exactly what that next thing is. If we can learn to live with the discomfort a little bit, then we can notice in there that at the bottom of every muddy pond, there is actually a golden key. But unless we stay in there long enough, we can't find it. We're usually scrambling for an exit. And that shows up in life as a pill, a therapist, even a coaching session sometimes. For me, it's often when I coach other people, I notice afterwards I feel a lot more positive about life. So for us that use coaching as a tool, that's the way that we can actually hide from ourselves what's actually happening underneath, what's really asking for our attention.
The other thing that you said that it really struck me is I think if I remember correctly, Campbell's language that he used was you return home at the end of the journey with the serum. But the one thing I didn't connect is that you said it's important that you share this with the world. And I think there's been this kind of interesting, for me, this is sort of profound, where I'm using sort of psychological terminology here, but that's my understanding of it. And what it is that when we're sort of fully resourced as human beings, like when we feel safe, when we have, a little bit of, we're not worried about how we'll eat tomorrow, for example. Our instinct is to help one another. And I found that in myself, and it seems like there's something connected there in this idea of bringing what it is that you find at the end of the journey back, and that sort of psychological theory I just put on the table. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I really do believe that we're incredibly good people.
I do too.
Yeah, and it's just a messy life. It's just life presents these things for us to grow. They're all grist for the mill, and sometimes we forget. And I love how we can actually give gratitude before we have reason, and it changes the way we negotiate with life. Reminds me of a little story. I was in Indonesia and I was hiking on a mountain, and I found this little hut in the middle of the dirt road in the middle of the jungle. And I walked in to say hello, and this family had nothing. They had no water. They had water in jerry cans that someone brought to them by hand. And they had a warm can of Coca-Cola, and they offered that to me. And that I think shows the propensity of humanity that even when we don't have anything, there's still something we can share that's of value. It's a moment that uplifts. And I think that shows how what an incredible thing the human being is. We're a living, walking miracle, but we've just forgotten.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, we've just forgotten. The other thing too is, Anthony, I have 2.5-year-old twin boys. And I remember looking at my partner being like, this is more evidence that human beings are great, because look, we've these two, without our care, without a lot of care, will not survive. And we have done this how many billions of times? I was like, there's so much care and love that goes into this. And, it's joyful work. I'm not talking about the quality of the work, but I was like, it just made me think about human beings differently. And so just a couple of things there.
I want to congratulate you,
Thank
on the endeavor that you're undertaking. That's amazing to have twins.
It is. It's funny too, because most of the I had 5 younger brothers, and we were like right in a row. So it was like, Ryan, take your brother here. So I left home and was like, I'm never having kids. And for 20 some years, I'd be like, hi, I'm Ryan, I'm never having kids. And then I had 2 at once. So it's kind of funny. But, I thought this was interesting. I don't know why I did this analysis, but I just was like, I wonder, as I was reading your book, I was like, what is the most common meaningful word in this book? And so I just kind of did a rough count here, and the most common word in the book that's other than like to or the or something is life. So I didn't know if you were aware of that. And when I reflect that to you, what is that? I don't know. What do you think the reason is for that?
It's funny you say that, because one part of the editing process was to go through and look at the most commonly used words. And
Yeah.
I think life always, if it's not and or the, I think life pretty much always wins in a self-development book, because it's everything, right? And it's either what we're up against or what we flow on top of. We're either riding it or we're being throttled or trampled by it. So it's, in a sense, it's our primary relationship, in a sense. I often say our primary relationship is actually with our breath, which is life. It's what we consider to be life force. So yeah, and I believe that as humans, we have not just the opportunity, but the right to negotiate with this thing called life. It's not that we need to be at life's behest, and it's not like we need to be overcome by what's happening outside. The theory of resonance for me is important. I've worked with sound medicine also for many years. And the thing about sound, first of all, every organ in our body has a vibration. Our body, each human being, has an overall vibration that's created by all the internal vibrations that are going on. This is life. Life is vibration. And when we are in a chaotic situation, I was filming with Hoda's team for her app a couple of days ago in Times Square about creating calm in the chaos. How do you create calm in the chaos? And when we are not aware of this flow of resonance, the outside vibration will invade us and will correspondingly awaken a similar vibration in ourselves. An example of this is if you take 2 guitars and you place them at each side of your room, and they're in tune, if you play one string, the same string on the other guitar will vibrate. And we've always used that term, oh, that really resonates for me. And we're expressing that, wow, that has a place to land, and it meets the way I feel too, and I agree, and all of those other things. But what we often forget is that this works 2 ways. We can, first of all, put up a filter against this outer vibration that might be invading us, but the outer vibration will also respond to the vibration that we create. It gives us a real opportunity to look inside our own laboratory, if you will, that place where we can actually experiment and play and do things and have fun and fail and succeed. And the result of our experiments in our inner laboratory will seek out others that resonate with it. And so I think this is so incredibly causative that we end up creating the life we want to have. And instead of this anomaly that we always want something that we haven't got, and yet we've really got exactly what we ordered, this is asking us to look at what we ordered and which part of us ordered it and what is there I want to change in my order form. So when I send it out to life or to the world, that I can achieve a different outcome or result.
Yeah, I think that summed up my experience. I was like, wait a second, I did everything on the checklist that you gave me and I'm not feeling great about it, which is in part why I sort of, ended up having a podcast where I talk to people about what it means, success means. But it is interesting. And I thought that it was going to be sort of force that would, you go out there and you make things happen. But where I've had sort of the biggest transformations is, I became a yoga instructor and a meditation teacher, and where I created the space without, with just the intention of creating space. And all of a sudden things come in like children, right? Like in my experience, but also like you can actually hear your thoughts and where you hear them. I want to say more resonantly, but you hear them more resonantly, but to the root of, this is what I'm expressing, right?
Yeah.
And so your explanation there hits me in a deep way. And I'm curious, breath work, I've sort of touched on that a little bit. I haven't done a lot, but I wonder how did that sort of became like the main sort of tool in the way that you work with people? Maybe you wouldn't classify it as that way, but how does that
Yeah, I
become so
would.
central?
Absolutely, I would.
Okay.
Absolutely, I would. I mean, I first of all, I'm a true believer. I'm a breath evangelist, and I I believe the breath is our best tool and always has been. It's just a question of how much we awaken to that as truth, so how much intimacy we create with our awareness of the breath and with the breath itself. And especially when dealing with the human condition, no matter where a person or people might find themselves or what they might have created for themselves, the power of the breath creates quantum opportunities. I train a lot of coaches, psychiatrists, surgeons, doctors, psychotherapists, to use breath work in this way. And I continually get, oh my goodness, what has taken me 10 years in therapy, I got in half an hour. There's something about embracing consciously the power of this thing that we call the breath, that it doesn't just accelerate. It's not just exponential. It's completely detached from the sequence that we're used to living in life. And this is part of this other matrix that exists. It allows us to visit this other matrix where the information comes in completely different forms. And at the same time, using a conscious connected breath in the correct way, we slow down the normal monkey mind that we think rules the roost. So the combination of these two things means we leave logic behind, and therefore we're not tethered to such a mundane form of measurement. We lose a sense of time, which we discover the more we do this, that it's a very human construct, time. We've kind of figured out a way to work with this thing, but
Yeah.
there's lots that we don't know. And when you leave those two realms behind, all of a sudden you're leapfrogging in different directions and always gaining something that you didn't expect that you would gain. So as a tool, if you're a practitioner of any of these forms of support, is just, to me, is absolutely the shiniest one in the box.
I just to highlight your point there about it's like breathing has become detached from our normal way of living. When I did some of the breath work, I can't remember the Sanskrit name for it, but the alternate nostril breathing.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't breathe out of my right nostril at all. How did I not? How did I not know that at the time? But I'm like, I didn't realize this. I was 40 years old. I didn't realize that I couldn't breathe out of this. And I think that's the thing there. Of course, there was that piece of information, but I was like, what else am I not aware of when it comes to this? And I think it's a way to kind of grow awareness, but definitely, in as far as breathing and meditation practice and things like that, it's one of those things. It's explaining an experience, right? But there's something that is awareness expanding about focusing on your breath and just really having that be the centerpiece of consciousness, and meditation. And so I can see that. It's definitely something that I'm curious now to explore a little more. So you also have a community called the Alchemy School of Healing Arts. And so how did this come to be? And what is there a relationship between this book and that, or are they connected, or is it just two separate sort of things, or how's that work?
Well, alchemy. Okay, so I founded Alchemy of Breath about 14 years ago. And that was really just to help people breathe. And very quickly I got asked to train. And so I started to train, which was an interesting evolution. It wasn't what I expected to do, to help other people do this work. And then the community of people that have studied with us now, I think we're probably the largest training institution in the world for breath work. And so we have over 2,000 facilitators, all in like 56 different countries, and they all want a place to come together. So really it was the community of them and the larger community that we serve, which is a few 100,000 directly that breathe with us regularly, that we thought, okay, what does this community want? And they said, we want a place to come together. So I spent probably 4 or 5 years looking from California to India to South America to upstate New York to Europe, all over Europe, and ended up in Italy. And I'm half Italian, so there was a reason, because I was thinking, my goodness, if I have to restore a whole half a village or something like that. How am I going to do it in Chinese or Portuguese when I don't speak those languages? It's going to be much more difficult. So I narrowed my search to Italy and was fortunate to find a place. And we chose a place that's in Tuscany. It's in the southern part of Tuscany, and it's the least developed part of Tuscany. It's the most natural, the most wild. We're about an hour and 10 minutes from the coast on the side of a volcano. It hasn't erupted for a few thousand years, but there's lots of thermal water around, hot water under the ground and hot springs and things. And I chose a village that was kind of like one of those villages where you could buy a house for $1. You might have seen them advertised once in a while. It hadn't got quite that bad. But it was mostly empty. It was a village when it was thriving, had 5,000 people, and it was down to about 400 when I got there. And I found this piece of land that was perfect for a campus because it wasn't just one big building. It was buildings spread out over several acres. People walk to classes and walk to visit each other, and there's privacy and a sense of community. We bring our students there to graduate, and we also bring our community. Anybody who wants to come can come and do breathwork retreats and other retreats, intuition retreats, the art of mastery retreats. Now we're doing an outer chaos in a calm retreat next year. I think 2 of them next year. And then what we do is we take the profits, which we're now just starting to make, and we invest them in the local communities. Really what we're seeking to do is to regenerate the town. I think already there are probably 800 people that live there as opposed to 400 5 years ago. But we've really been very, very slow about the development because we don't want to overwhelm the local people.
Yeah.
We want to be really respectful of the local culture, which is very rich and very beautiful. So much to learn from the elders there. And we want to integrate with them. We want to be, we want exchange with them. We don't want to be an isolated little place. So that's the project, which is called Alchemy School of Healing Arts, which is ASHA for short. And it's not meant to be limited just to breathwork. It's meant to be expanded to also receive other teachers who want to run retreats or workshops or anything of that nature.
Yeah. For me personally, I spent 10 days in Italy, and it's, we definitely hit the tourist places, but I spent some time by myself, like in, some of the countrysides and whatnot. And this, I don't think this will land with you. I say it for the listeners, but in the US, it's so funny. We don't realize how young of a country we are. We don't realize that. Like when you go there and you're seeing houses that have been there for literally thousands of years, it's a different experience. And there is something. I mean, I walked for miles and miles and miles, just soaking in everything. And it's interesting this is the way I can explain it. So maybe this will land with somebody listening. If you've got a road that's only going to, it's this big in Italy, and the argument is, no, we're not going to replace the road. It's 10,000 years old.
Yeah.
That would be an argument in the US to tear it up and do it again. And I'm like, well, what does that mean about us? There is something about, I don't know, the slowness. I even saw some things in myself. I enjoyed the pace of life, and I couldn't, I would go and ask for a coffee and they'd give me an espresso, and I like espresso. And then they'd be like, oh, cafe Americano. And then it's 2 espressos and water. And I'm like, the coffee wasn't big enough for me. I'm like, what is it about like more and more, and then all the historical things. Yeah, it happened 10,000 years ago over there. And, we don't have that in the US. And so there is something about this beautiful area of the world. And it wasn't even really on my map to go to, but if you're going to go there, make sure 10 days is not long enough to soak it all in, especially if you're coming from a Western point of view. And I think that just really, the idea of finding that place in Italy, which is sort of, I don't know, there seems to be some personal tie there. It's where you're from, or you spent a lot of time, right?
I've actually spent more time in Italy than I have in England, although I was raised in England. In my old life, before I found this wonderful thing that I get to do now, I was involved in architecture and restoration of these old buildings that you were talking about. And the principle wasn't to knock them down and rebuild. Sometimes we would even have to number each stone and photograph where it laid, so we would relay it in the same place. If it was a listed building or a building of significant cultural importance, you have to really, it's like almost archaeology that you're, almost with a pair of tweezers taking this thing apart so you can put it back together exactly the way that it used to be. It's humbling. It's very humbling to see a tower that was built 1,500 years ago that's 70 or 80 feet tall, and you look up the corner of the tower and it's still absolutely straight. And they didn't even
Yeah.
use cement. They weren't even using
Yeah.
cement. It's humbling to think of how these people did this with very low tech and just an amazing sense of design and art and craftsmanship. So
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
reminder. It's a good reminder.
Yeah, it's a reminder of what we're capable of, and I think sometimes we forget that. One of the stories that I remember hearing there is we went to Perugia, and that was at one point in time, Perugia was completely wiped out, and they just built a new city on top of it. So you can actually go under it and see I'm like, that is, and we're talking, this was, 600 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's incredible. So
that's right. That's where that escalator is, isn't it? When you go up into the town and you go underneath. Yeah, very beautiful.
Well, I'm scared I'm not going to remember this right. So if not, but I think that was the reason why, is I think that they had an aqueduct that could go uphill. And I think the Pope he was not okay with that at the time and sent out his armies to conquer, I think. But that's the thing, is they're like, oh, okay, well, we're just going to build the city on top of the other one. So it's just remarkable. So, Anthony, if it's okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about you. You use a lot of examples from your life in the book. And, I think one of the interesting things you talk about the journey, the hero's journey, but you also talk about time a little bit too. And as far as life happening, these 7-year circle. And so if you looked at your childhood through these 7-year circles, or your life, I guess, not just your childhood, you're kind of coming up. Which one was the most significant in kind of shaping where you're at now?
The first. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all my work confirms that too. It's that first 7 years, that even birth. I mean, for my facilitators, I take them through a really deep inner journey. The book itself is an easy introduction to the inner journey that we take people on. And, in that just the 7 years before birth and the birth itself, or just even the birth itself, I've got 7 pages of research of different aspects that might happen when you were born and how they show up in your later life. And that's just the 24 hours or the 6 hours or whatever it took for the delivery to occur. So, a late born child is often late in life. And, a cesarean is perhaps inclined to not greet challenges with sufficient willfulness to succeed, because they didn't have to go through the birth canal. And indeed, all of those moments that we feel a rising pressure and containment that we can't stay in the place that we're in, we've got to get out of here, are a reenactment of being in the birth canal when there was no option but to come through. And that's that same thing as the do or die moment I mentioned in the hero's journey, when the pressure is so intense that it's like, it feels like 90% I've got to buckle here, but somehow you get through that 10%. And so I would say definitely the first 7 years is the most influential. It's when our subconscious archive is developed and filled with information. And I think the rest of the 7-year pieces are all about trying to manage what happened in those first 7 years.
That's so I will tell you that I think my mother's due date, or my due date, was June 20th. And then I was born July 4th. So, wow. And then, I mean, I get there, but like always a minute late. And then like, really, so it's so funny that you said that. But in your experience, you talked about, you entered the world through cesarean under anesthesia, and parents weren't present. How did that impact you? How was
that made me, I think that's where my sense of not belonging came from. It also, what I had to overcome as a result of that was the unconscious dissociation that would occur if I was uncomfortable. I'd abstract out of it. I'd kind of not pay attention to what was uncomfortable, not consciously, but automatically. And I think that was perhaps one of the more serious things that happened as a result of that, and the ability to numb out. unconsciously to numb out. In conscious connected breath sessions, I teach people that when you're watching someone breathe, people breathe how they live. A lot of people who've been anesthetized during the birth process, that could be a spinal, injection of any kind, or anything, any medication at all given to the mum. It takes 45 seconds for that to come through the umbilical cord. It's very, very quick. When people are in a breath session, that's when you really see it, that they start breathing and then all of a sudden their eyes roll up in their head and they just kind of go into la-la land. And it's important to bring them back, because that's a great way to overcome that particular habit, is to actually consciously breathe through it. And that's why the breath is so significant if we're going to work with anything that's in the subconscious realm. And that is that first 7 or perhaps 8 years of our lives, that the best way to access it gently, that subconscious, and reinform it is by repetition. So when you choose to breathe repeatedly over a period of time, like half an hour, an hour, or an hour and a half, you really are accessing a part of yourself that normally remains under all those layers of forgetting that we tend to put there, because a lot of our childhood really wasn't so comfortable. And those moments of shame, or the moments of trauma, the moments of shyness, are moments that we try to get away from, right? We don't want to have them in our life today. So we find ways of avoiding dealing with them. So a lot of this work, especially in the coaching realms or psychotherapeutic realms, is about using the breath as a way to reconnect with those parts of us that we isolated from because they were wounded or hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so beautifully said. I think that that's one thing that people might consider woo-woo, or that there's like not a lot of research for, but that's not true. There's a lot of research about this type of thing. The first, especially birth being sort of a defining event in the way that you experience life. Me and my partner, we were like, okay, we are not doing, they're twins. So they're really trying to steer us towards a C-section. And we're like, we're not doing that, and we tried really hard for there to be no drugs, but it just became the humane thing to do. But I think that we were sort of sold on that. And there is, like you said, there's seven pages. I think there's a lot of research out there that I've seen on this, that this is impactful.
Yeah. So
you also talk about in the book how you in midlife, you became very ill. And it's still somewhat like I don't know. It wasn't exactly spelled out there was a parasite, but doctors really didn't know what to do. And you were sort of stuck and having to deal with, pain to the point where you were delirious. And I just wonder, what was that experience like? What did it, I'll just say
it was, I think it was definitely a defining moment of my life. I think it was probably the most pivotal moment of my life. I was already involved in breath work, and prior to that, after my business life, in my late 40s, I moved in order to recover from being like a type A times 3 person. I bought a boat, I started sailing, and then I moved to Asia. I moved to India for 4 years of meditation, and then continued sitting in Bali in Indonesia for another 3 years before I came back to the world again. So I'd managed to it took 7 years to slow down my mind, and I wanted to make sure that my reentry was conscious. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but I definitely wanted to give back to the world and find a way that I could help this sickness that I saw. So I did start with breath work, and I'd started having people come and breathe with me. And this was in Bali. And then I got very ill, and nobody could find out what was wrong. And it was a parasite. Eventually we found out, but I got very close to death at least twice as a result of medications not working. And at first people not knowing what it was, they were medicating the wrong thing. So the experience of that was, I call it the great illness, but it was also the great gift, as often these illnesses are. And the symptoms for me were not sleeping, and also tremendous swelling in my body and polyneuralgia. I couldn't move anything without a sort of a stabbing pain, and that would cause contraction that would then send pain everywhere, and the whole body would go into this negative cycle of pain. So I learned to lie still. And it's still the pain, even if I breathed too vigorously, the pain would come back again. I had to learn how to breathe without moving my body. And this is where I discovered, and I went through all those stages of, look, why is this happening? I'm going to muscle through this. Why can't I muscle through it? It's like every ounce of will that I brought to the mix got thrashed by pain. So it was a futile struggle. And eventually I got beaten into this reality of like sipping the air in such small quantities. It's almost as if I wasn't breathing at all. I was taking the absolute minimum that I needed. And in that space, I was in that space for maybe 7 or 8 weeks during this illness. And I think I discovered what surrender meant, in no uncertain terms. I understood that life isn't just about will, it's also about surrender. And then I began to look at what purpose meant. What does purpose mean? Is purpose what drives me and therefore I'm a slave to it? Or is it something that I generate from my heart? Or is it something that comes through me? What is the nature of purpose and what is my relationship with it? And I think I got close enough to a still point, in other words, not breathing at all. First of all, I can really understand how those yogis in caves in India are able to stop breathing for long periods of time. But I can't say I got there, but I was able to have maybe almost a minute between breaths. I think I got to a still point. It was like the slate was cleaned and there really was a line in the sand. And it was like, okay, Anthony, every conscious step that you make from now on, or every step that you make from now on, needs to be informed by consciousness. Otherwise, you're going to fall back into the old traps of being egotistical about how many people broke through when you did a breath work. And I think I'd approached it. I wasn't entirely clean. And that's, I think, when the mastery, it was like a new level of mastery was being called for. It's like, don't accept a superficial sense of mastery. Don't accept because someone is telling you that you're incredible and that you changed your life. Don't accept that that's true. It might be true, but don't accept that it's true. Be who you are. Don't be distracted from who you really are. I think the transition was from being a human doing into being a human being at that point, that I understood the power of being is really much more important than our sense of control, than our need to control things, because we can't control life. We can participate and we can co-create, but we can't control it. So I think those were the lessons that I learned, and it changed everything. I probably do as much as I did when I was a AAA, plus on the A train, but I do it with a sense of calm. I do it with a sense of peace and pleasure and joy.
What do you think that illness would have been like if you wouldn't have taken the 7 years sort of to slow down?
Gosh, that's a wonderful question. I don't know if I would have survived it, honestly. I don't know if I would have survived. I mean, I came this close. I was like days away because symptoms were just getting worse and worse, and all the labs were looking worse and worse. So I don't think I would have made it through. And I think the lesson for that is that we can do this preventatively. We don't actually need to wait until the crisis occurs. And that's really what my life is devoted to now. That's what my purpose is to help people. Let's deconstruct the architecture of what we thought we were gently and carefully, a bit like those pickup sticks or whatever that Jingo or whatever that game's called, where you remove things gently, not so everything crumbles in one go. But this can be done kindly and consciously in such a way as we can reorganize the bits that were good and reutilize those, but we can discard the bits that have hurt us and kept us small and held us back and make fresh choices as a result.
Yeah. So how does breath work assist in that?
Well, imagine if someone offered you an opportunity to become 5 times as intelligent as you are right now. What would you do? Would you say yes or no? And that's just 5 times. Yeah. But it is true that 20% of the messages come from the brain to the body, and 80% of the messages are actually going the other way around. And we don't learn to think with our body. We think the brain has 100% of the show. So when we breathe, it's an embodiment exercise, and it awakens connection with the body. And we learn to understand the signals and the messages and the language that the body uses to tell us things. So it's the breath and the body, really, but it does feel like we're a multiple of times more intelligent. We get it. We don't need to slog. We need to slog with the breath because it's called breath work. It's not breath holiday or breath vacation.
Yeah.
It's breath work. So the paradox is, if you put your work into the breath, then the breath does a lot of the work for you back. Like any relationship, right?
Yeah.
The more you invest in the relationship, the more fruit it will bear.
I do have a couple more questions I want to get to. So I thank you for these beautiful explanations. In the book, you talk about inner child. And I think, again, to bring up this concept, this is like a lot of times I'll bring this up with people. And even I think when I was younger, I considered it like a woo-woo concept, meaning it was like unscientific or something. But there sort of is increasing body of like psychological studies that are discovering, that this is again tied to childhood. And I thought it was interesting. You had this idea of a bridge, and it's a method you've put in place to help people sort of act as a bridge to help heal their inner child. What could you tell us about that method?
Great question. Well, first of all, we spoke earlier on about abandoning parts of ourselves that we used to be because of trauma, and we wanted to cover it with that layer of forgetting. So it's like, distance myself, get away from there. I don't want to go back there. And
Yes.
The consequence of that is that a part of ourselves is left behind. So that's the premise for what I'm about to say. The other thing is, I'm not a believer in trauma release. I would call it trauma repair. And what we're actually repairing with, we're repairing a part of ourselves that we abandoned, we left behind because it was too painful to remember, with who we are now. So if you imagine, for every time that you've been shocked or traumatized, you've either frozen, fought, or fled. And you also lose your breath in that moment too, right? It's like, you catch your breath. And the trauma gets embodied. Those traumas often become chronic illnesses in later life if there's no resolution provided. So the principle of the bridge is it's a short process of maybe 30 to 40 minutes, and it helps people reconnect with one part of themselves from the past and create a bridge over which that part of them can come back into wholeness again. Now, once the bridge is built, then all the other times that we were shocked or wounded, and all the other times we covered up with layers of forgetting and wanted to sort of run away from ourselves, all of those can rejoin us as well. So it's an incredibly powerful, super simple process that enables something to happen in a very short period of time and teaches us that the more clean we keep that bridge afterwards, if you will, the more we keep it present, the more creative, the more empowered, the more fun we have. We just become more whole as a human being. Because the consequence, if we don't do that, is we'll see what we see in presidential debates, is like 11-year-old kids arguing with each other because they're not resolved. There's not a sense of resolution, an inner resolution. Yeah. So the inner child, indeed, as you say, it is now well established to be true that this happens. Mm-hmm. Bessel van der Kolk, in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, speaks of it extensively. Some of his students have also written books that go into it even more deeply. Richard Schwartz, with Internal Family Systems, is all about this kind of a resolution. But the bridge is a more simple and immediate way that is embodied. We actually use the body as we do this in such a way as to bring in this repairing process a sense of resolution in the body rather than something that keeps getting triggered and awakened.
Yeah, I just want to point out that this is I mentioned before that I experienced the power of just like making space. This is like a more intentional way to do that. You're creating a space for, to create to have this piece of you that you left behind actually come back, and you're just, I don't know, there's something that's really resonates with me on that. So, and the word resonance comes up again too.
Yeah.
So in your transformative journey, you had to let go of things, right? And the things that maybe weren't you. What was the hardest thing you had to sort of let go of?
The survival urge. I think the survival urge. I was a single parent at a very young age. I was 18 years old and I was living in America, and all of a sudden on my own with my son, and I had to provide. So that really made me produce, and I became really successful really quickly and kept on gaining more and more and accumulating more and more until my 40s. And then I realized that actually I'm still sitting inside a cage, and this cage was of my own making. It was a cage I created. It was an architecture that I created to protect myself from the slings and arrows of misfortune and outer forces. But it then became the cage that I had to live in, this tiny little existence that was all about the list that I had to complete, the targets that I needed to reach this month. I had a large workforce that needed to be paid every month, and I was the one that worried about it. And that's what I needed to let go of. That's what took 7 years. I still have a large workforce today, but I don't worry so much. I trust more. I really believe if we're in resonance or harmony with life, that we will be helped. I do believe we've got guardians, or whatever you want to call them, that are really aching to help us if we will allow it to happen. And I guess we get to ask the question, if I don't believe in a higher power, how can a higher power help me?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I can't help but there's sort of a framework that I'm developing, a coaching framework, and one of the things that shows up in there is making the shift from self-doubt to self-trust. And I can't help but bring that up here. You sort of referenced that. And a lot of what I'm hearing that took for you was surrender.
Yeah.
But maybe you could, I don't know, maybe you could help me understand that a bit more.
I'd love to. Of course, I'm still figuring it out, right? I think the only way to live is to be a student of life. But I think the best analogy I can use is the breath itself. When you consider what that first breath would have been like when you were born, and the not just the physiological things, that it was your first act of agency, because you're disconnected from the mothership and your body is becoming now dependent on your own effort to survive. And in those first minutes, you're cleaning out the remaining fluid from your lungs that wasn't cleared before. But when you just think of existence from a more existential point of view, my goodness, this grasp of the magnificence and the hugeness and the unconditional acceptance of this air that we take, it bears a life to it. I could meditate on that for a year and not have fully understood the mystery of it. It's still mysterious. And I get to practice that every day, right? Every time I'm inhaling, I get to repeat that act. And then at the end of my life, my last breath is going to be the utter letting go of everything. Everything has to be surrendered at that point. And so every time we breathe out is a potential act of surrender. And we actually live, will, and surrender in this relationship with the in and the out breath 25,000 times a day. If we think of our exhale or exhalation as practice for dying, and if we consider, and I wish we would, I think it was Stephen Jenkinson who wrote that wonderful book called Die Wise, which is about become more death aware, more aware that there is an end to that bookshelf, and we can't indefinitely put books on it because they'll start to fall off.
Yeah.
Then we'll learn to live a lot better. And then we understand there is as much power in surrender as there is in will. And I think a great haiku that a friend of mine, Michael Halleck, wrote, which was, "When I finally stopped squirming, God kissed my heart." It's like sometimes we engage in the struggle and we really don't have to. It's like, we're standing in the river with our canoe and it's horizontal to the current and we're like hanging on to it, like, yeah, I'm gonna live life. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna survive.
Yeah.
All we really need to do is turn it 90 degrees and hop in and enjoy the ride,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's such a great analogy. And it's funny too because I saw myself in that analogy because that's what it feels like when you're there. You're like, why will the
Yeah.
world not bend around me? You
Yeah.
know? And like that's the question that you're asking, like in your toil there. It's a beautiful metaphor. Really lands with me, Anthony. Really. So, what misconception about breath work frustrates you because it sort of prevents people from the experience itself? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, a few things, and ending with a cautionary note as well. First of all, expectation is the enemy of results, and it's important to distinguish between expectation and expectancy. So expectancy is a state of alertness and enthusiastic waiting, if you will, not knowing what's going to happen. And expectation is riddled with conditions like, I need it to happen, it better happen otherwise, or if it doesn't happen, I failed. All of those stories that we tell ourselves
Mhm.
take root and thrive in an atmosphere of expectation. So I think the first thing is expectation. The next thing is the waiting needs to be fierce and focused. And this is a weird one because the mind wants to encapsulate things in order to feel safe. But we really need to let go of what we know in order to discover what we don't know. And the breath helps because we're slowing down, as I said earlier, slowing down the prefrontal cortex. So we think differently. We already think slower. But fierce waiting is perhaps like you're driving through the fog and you're going 10 miles an hour because you don't want to hit anything. And your focus is so intense that you're looking for any form or shape that might come that will guide how you steer, for example. It's that kind of intensity. And the more you're able to do that, the more you notice as you're breathing. And what we do to help with that at Alchemy is we have people focus on their body. What's going on with your body? What is your body telling you? Whatever your body movement is, sometimes your hands curl up in tetany, or you involuntarily have a shake in a limb, or you have emotions that come and they start in your belly or your chest. And the question is always, what's my body saying to me? What is it my body wants me to know? So paying attention, I think, is the replacement for expectation. And the cautionary word is to please don't just check if your facilitator is certified. Check the institution they were certified by and make sure that they are accredited. Because what's happened since breathwork's become a buzzword is that there's a lot of unscrupulous stuff going on. And you can see in social media that you can become a breathworker over a weekend for $99, and it's all by recordings. And really, I want my facilitators to be able to be alongside someone in the last breaths of life. That's how qualified I want them to be. And I want them not to be scared. I want them to be fully present with that person for the last breaths of their life. And some of my breath workers do that for a living. They join the MAID program in Canada. They help people in terminal stages of life. And it's so valid to learn how to breathe. Even if you only have a month left, it changes so much of people's perspective about death. It's just so supportive and helpful. But most of all, make sure that you practice with someone you can trust so you can be vulnerable, so you can allow old constructs to crumble and polish off the lens with a fresh view on what life might be like.
I'm glad that you brought up the caution because actually that was something I was curious about. Why I think, and you'll correct my verbiage here. When I was learning to be a yoga teacher, we did like a short. It was like, this is what breath work is. We did a couple of things, and I remember my instructor at the time, she gave this sort of response. She's like, listen, I know everybody always asks, we're not going to do anything that has to do with Kundalini because some people just don't know that's too much. So I never asked them about that, but I just wonder, what was it that she was referring to there? Is that aligned with what you're saying?
Yeah, it is. I mean, Kundalini breathwork is very powerful, and there's something called a Kundalini awakening, and that can also happen in the breath that we do as well, which is a very dramatic moment of awareness. I mean, it's a massive download. It could be compared to a near-death experience in terms of the impact that it could have. It could be very, very life-changing. And remember, especially in the Indian culture, in the Vedic culture, breath has been kept secret for thousands of years. The use of breath has been kept secret because you need to know what you're doing. It's medicine. And just like any medicine, you don't want to take it at the wrong time or take it in the wrong way. So, and like normal breath practices, all well and good. If you're breathing in for 5 and breathing out for 5 and things that are regulating your nervous system and helping you cope with life, like to develop a sense of calm in the middle of the chaos. Those are one thing, but Kundalini practices and also the practices to really create inner alchemy in perpetuity, alchemy that lasts, change that lasts. You really do need experience alongside you.
Okay, thanks for helping for answering that question, helping me understand that a little better. So, just a couple of questions to wrap up here, and these won't take us as deeply as we've gone. So, we talk about in this podcast that we want to explore the paths of authenticity and what success and fulfillment mean. And I think success and fulfillment, are related concepts, and there might even be an overlap. And if that's true, what might we call that space where they overlap?
Wow. Success and what was the other one?
Fulfillment.
Well, what is the definition of success? I heard Stephen Bartlett say the other day that it's managing my expectations appropriately so I meet them.
Yeah. I guess it depends on the definition.
Yeah. There's one interpretation of what success is. To me, I would say I would include that everything that we want, everything that we seek, everything that we would like to manifest, we're actually already doing. So where they overlap for me, where success and fulfillment overlap is in the awareness that I've really got what I want. It's already here. And maybe that lens polishing is what I need to do. I need to pay attention in a different way because I'm clearly listening to repeat tapes that are going on if I'm not feeling that way.
Repeat tape, yeah. What is the purpose of the human journey?
Love. Yeah, I think all roads lead to love. Yeah, I think we're meant to get that. And when you think of those peak moments when you feel the gush or the rush of the oxytocin and everything that comes with love, wouldn't it be great if that was a state of being? And isn't that really our birthright?
Yeah. As we discussed earlier, you use a lot of framing with the hero's journey. Where do you see humanity collectively stuck right now in that arc? Or maybe they're not stuck. Maybe I'm using my own, but where's humanity in that?
I think a lot of people feel that mastery is the ultimate destination and they stop there. They stop when they've got the jewelry and they don't bring it back home. And I think we're taught because that will in some way assuage our fear and it makes us selfish. I think a good example of this is money. Money in Europe until the 13th century, whatever currency you had would have no value when the monarch died. When the king or the queen died, the money would have no value. So it would start all over again. Money only became the icon that it is because people started hanging on to it. And the de Medicis in 1471, I think, opened Monte dei Paschi di Siena, which was the first bank that was ever opened. And that's when money started to be accumulated. So it's like we keep hanging on to things, but here's the question. If you're going to hang on to things, how can you flow? You're not flowing at all. So I would say money.
Yeah. So what stage do people resist most fiercely today? Maybe this is a similar answer.
Resting in happiness, resting in bliss, resting in now.
It's funny to say that out loud, but that lands like the resisting resting and resisting bliss. It's interesting. So I wanted to ask you, Anthony, how can people get involved with your community or connect with you online or otherwise?
Thanks for the question. You can join us through alchemyofbreath.com and you'll access everything through there. And that includes free breathworks every Sunday, which we've been doing for 10 years now. And you'll breathe with several hundred other people too, so you get an idea of what it's like to breathe online. You can join us at asha.global and get directly to our retreat and community center in Italy. And of course, you can buy the book. And we do have a special offer if you buy, first of all, the Kindle costs nothing. I think it costs $1. That's because I really want to help those who don't have money, that they can at least get the benefit. But the hard copy, if you get the hard copy, you send us a photograph, we will give you a free one-to-one session from a qualified facilitator, and that's worth about $250. I really recommend that as a good beginning for somebody.
That's incredible. Like a one free session?
Yeah, you get a free session. Just send us a photograph of the book with your pretty face above it, and you can send that to Anna at alchemyofbreath.com.
We'll have that link in the show notes.
Great.
So people can find that and click on that. So just to wrap up, what's a question that you wish interviewers would ask, or I would have asked that I didn't, or maybe you'd like to address?
Oh my God, I've never been asked that question. Well, when I interview people, I always like to try find ways to get under, something about vulnerability. What is it that makes you most easily connect with your vulnerability? Something like that.
I think one thing that's really present to me at this moment in time is that I guess I suffer from this sort of idea that I'm aware of. I've been coached around this, and there's a belief of worth equals production, and I think sometimes just admitting that is difficult. It's all has to kind of do with that. Like, or if I'm not prepared to do something, or I'm not as good at something as you might think, or whenever I have those judgments kind of against me, it really, it's just my own self, reflect. I might not ever know if somebody has that or not. It's like, wow, you screwed it up again. You were a minute late.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Does that resonate for me? I get that too. I think I would agree with that. And I think my honest answer before you answered, because I don't want to just say, yeah, same. It's something to do with, I think it's something to do with not knowing how long I've got left and accepting that as a part of every breath, in any given moment. When I went out this morning to the vet and I left my wife, she had an appointment and I didn't have time to say goodbye. And, I thought about that as I was walking back. Wow. I need to pay more attention to this. And this really feels like essential. This feels really deep and touches my heart, that the kindness that we give to people and the care that we give to people, even if they frown at it or discard it, is never to be stopped. We need to always find ways, random acts of kindness that we can do for other people.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that, because I think there's a connection for me there too. It's like I only have so much time to whatever, get all this production out into the world, and at the same time, there's a part of me that's sort of like, that's silly. I hear myself say it. So yeah, thank you for asking that. Anthony, I've so enjoyed our conversation today, and I just really devoured that book. I just was like, it just helped me give language to ideas that I've had and connect some things together. And I mean, even my experience, that's the reason why I brought it into this space of going to Italy and just, I spent a week in Tuscany too, just understanding what that space is like and what the buildings are like. There's something about that just is resonant in the book too. And just this conversation with you, it's just been absolutely brilliant for me. So thank you so much.
It's been a joy for me too, Ryan, and a joy to be able to hopefully get a message out there that can help people.
Yeah, certainly. Well, that's what we're here to do. So thank you so much. I hope we get a chance to talk again.
Yeah. Thank you. Blessings.